He was a single father, weathered by life's relentless storms, piecing together a world for his little girl with calloused hands and a heart too stubborn to break. She was a billionaire CEO, a fortress of ambition, too powerful to trust, too lonely to confess the quiet ache gnawing at her soul. Their worlds didn't collide with a crash, but with the subtle chaos of a borrowed car and a forgotten umbrella, its rain-soaked handle dripping in a marble lobby. What followed wasn't just fate, it was fiercer, a story of second chances, of love that speaks in whispers but endures like stone. Stay with this tale. It might just carve a home in your heart. The ivory envelope landed on Lila Von Hart's desk like a velvet-sheathed dagger, its satin sheen masking a wound meant to sting. Her assistant Claire placed it with the caution of someone handling a live spark, then stepped back, her eyes flickering with unease. Lila glanced up from her laptop, the glow of spreadsheets casting sharp shadows across her angular face. The wedding invitation sat pristine, its gold-embossed script a calculated insult. Julian Warwick and Clara Beaumont cordially invite Miss Lila Van Hart to celebrate their union. A low chuckle slipped from her lips, jagged as broken crystal. "He actually thinks I'd show up," she murmured, her voice slicing through the sterile air of Van Hart Tower's executive suite. Claire shrugged, her expression a blend of pity and pragmatism. "I think that's the point, to see if you've crumbled." Lila set the envelope down, her tone cold as forged steel. "No, he doesn't want me there. He wants to tally my scars." She rose, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and crossed to the floor-to-ceiling window. Manhattan's skyline shimmered below, its lights fractured by a soft drizzle, a city that echoed her, radiant, unyielding, yet softened at the edges. Von Hart Tower reflected her image, tall, composed, untouchable. "This isn't an invitation," she said, her breath clouding the glass. "It's a challenge." Claire's silence hung like a question, the room holding its breath. Lila turned, her eyes blazing with a fire that could topple empires. "Oh, I'll go," she said, her voice low, charged with resolve. "But I'm not going alone." Her words lingered like a spark in dry grass, igniting the path to a confrontation she'd long buried. 3 days later, the lower lobby of Van Hart Enterprises pulsed with the quiet rhythm of wealth, a world of polished marble and hushed efficiency. Ethan Caldwell pushed a dolly stacked with crates of premium spring water down a gleaming corridor, muttering under his breath. "15th floor, fancy water for fancier egos. Don't let the suits corner me about the schedule." His boots scuffed the floor, a gritty contrast to the pristine surroundings. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with a woman, her presence halting him like a sudden gust. "Sorry, I didn't—" His words faltered as he looked up and froze. There stood Lila Von Hart, no name tag or introduction needed. Her aura parted crowds, not with fear but with a commanding grace that silenced rooms. She paused, her gaze not dismissive but piercing, as if she saw beyond his faded flannel, worn jeans, and gloves etched with years of toil. Ethan stood tall, lean, rugged, his posture unbroken despite the weight of countless hard days. His eyes, steady and unyielding, met hers without flinching. A small voice broke the tension. "Daddy, they gave us the wrong box again." Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter, peeked from behind him, tugging at his shirt. Her wide eyes glowed with a child's unshakable trust. Ethan's face softened, a tender fracture in his weathered armor, like sunlight piercing a concrete wall. Lila watched, her heart stirring with something unfamiliar. A quiet echo of a feeling she thought she'd buried long ago, pulling her into a moment she hadn't anticipated. That echo sharpened Lila's gaze, not at Ethan, but at a spark within herself, a forgotten note in a song she hadn't sung in years. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steady, but laced with a curiosity that felt almost dangerous. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "I'm the guy with the hand truck. Not exactly on your corporate radar." "I didn't ask for your resume." "Ethan Caldwell," he said, pausing before adding cautiously. "You?" She didn't answer, her silence a deliberate choice, her eyes holding his with an intensity that demanded attention. Her next words cut through the air like a blade cloaked in silk. Are you free Saturday night? His brow furrowed, suspicion flickering in his eyes. No. Saturday night, I'm tutoring third-grade math for her. He nodded toward Sophie, who was inspecting a crate label with solemn focus. Lila's lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile. I need you to come with me to a wedding. Whose wedding? My former fiancé's. He left me. Now he's marrying someone else. Ethan tilted his head, his voice dry but steady. You want me to make a scene? Flash a smug grin? Play your tuxedoed rebound? Lila stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, each word deliberate, weighted with intent. I want him to regret everything, and I want you to be the reason. The air between them crackled, a silent challenge that tethered their fates, pulling Ethan into her orbit with a force he couldn't yet name. Ethan let out a low laugh, shaking his head, the sound rough but genuine. Lady, you could hire a male model or some A-list actor. Why me? Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding, precise, cutting through the layers of his guarded exterior. Because they don't have your eyes. The words landed not as flattery but as truth, sharp and undeniable, piercing the armor he'd worn for years. For the first time in too long, someone didn't look through him. They saw him, the man who carried loss like a shadow, but stood unbowed. Ethan went still, his breath catching. $50,000, she'd said. One night, no touching, no pretense of romance. Just be polite, poised, and make Julian Warwick feel like he'd lost something irreplaceable. 50 grand could mean Sophie's ear surgery, 3 months' rent, a chance to breathe without the world crushing his chest. He knelt, adjusting Sophie's collar with a tenderness that belied his calloused hands, then looked up, a fire kindling in his gaze. One condition, he said. Lila raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. I pick my own suit, and I don't pretend to be anyone else. A rare smile broke across her face, sharp and genuine, like sunlight slicing through storm clouds. Perfect, she said. I'm not hiring a role. I'm hiring a man no one forgets. Their agreement sealed, the moment felt like the first step into a storm neither could predict, a pact that bound them to a shared defiance. Rain tapped softly against the towering windows of Von Hart Enterprises' executive suite, a gentle counterpoint to the tension simmering within. Ethan stepped inside, his presence like a soldier crossing into enemy territory, his gray Henley and clean jeans stark against the marble floors and priceless art. Lila stood at the bar, pouring still water into a crystal glass, her movements deliberate, elegant, a study in control. She didn't look up as she spoke. You're early. I've always been early, Ethan replied, his voice steady but edged with grit. The world forgets you when you're late and invisible. She turned, her gaze measured, composed, yet piercing, as if she could see the scars he hid beneath his skin. And are you invisible, Mr. Caldwell? He met her eyes without flinching, his voice low but firm. You tell me. You picked me out of a crowd of ghosts. A dense silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Lila gestured to the armchair across from her, her movement fluid, inviting. Sit. Ethan complied cautiously, his hands resting on his knees, fingers scarred but still, as if bracing for what came next. The room felt like a chessboard, and they were both players, sizing up the board before the first move. You have questions, Lila said, setting her glass down, her fingers steady as stone. Ask them. He studied her, his voice low, deliberate. Why me, really? Because you don't look like someone who needs to prove anything, she replied, her words cutting clean, sharp as a blade. And that terrifies people who live for applause. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes narrowing. You want to make your ex jealous? No. Her voice was a quiet storm, low and unyielding. I want him unsettled. I want him to look at you and wonder how I replaced him with someone who doesn't chase the spotlight. Someone solid, someone real. Ethan raised a brow, a dry smile tugging at his lips. That's an expensive therapy session you're staging. Lila's lips curved faintly, a spark of amusement in her eyes. I'm not here to heal. I'm here to disrupt. His fingers tapped his thigh, slow and thoughtful. weighing her words. You ever think he might not care? That you'll walk in with me and he'll just smile and move on? Her voice dropped, cold as winter rain. Julian doesn't smile unless he's winning. He left me for a name, not a woman. And now he wants me to watch his victory lap like some discarded relic. Ethan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing further, probing. So you want to haunt him? No, she said, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. I want to be the storm he never saw coming. Her words hung in the air, a vow that bound them closer, pulling Ethan deeper into her world of calculated defiance. Ethan leaned back, letting her words settle like ash after a fire. All right, he said after a pause, his voice steady but resolute. I'll do it, but I want it in writing. No surprises, no games. And if your rich friends try to make me their entertainment, I walk. Lila nodded, already reaching for the tablet on her desk, her movements precise, unhurried. Done. And one more thing, Ethan. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. If you're walking beside me, I need you sharp. You'll face CEOs, hedge fund sharks, and socialites who think the staff are part of the decor. He smirked, dry and unyielding. I used to run rooms like that, back when people still answered my calls. Her eyes flickered with curiosity, catching the first hint of his buried past, a crack in the armor he wore so well. You've been in that world. Ethan's gaze darkened, a shadow passing over his face, heavy with memories he didn't share. Long enough to know it bites when you stop playing its game. Lila didn't press, sensing the weight behind his words. Instead, she handed him a sleek black folder, its contents a blueprint for their shared mission. The wedding's Saturday, 6 p.m., Ravenswood Manor in Greenwich. I'll send a car. There'll be cameras. You'll be seen. I'm not camera shy, he said, taking the folder without opening it, his grip firm. You might be when they start digging for your name. I scrubbed my name years ago. That stopped her, her eyes narrowing, not with suspicion but with intrigue, as if she'd glimpsed a hidden chapter of his story. You're not just a delivery guy, are you? Ethan stood, the folder unread in his hand, his voice quiet but final. I am now. That's all that matters. His words closed the conversation, but the air between them hummed with questions left unasked, binding them in a quiet pact as they prepared to face the storm together. The next day, Ethan stood before the gleaming glass facade of Grayson & Cole Taylor's, a storefront so pristine it seemed to judge him before he even crossed the threshold. The kind of place where prices were whispers, and if you had to ask, you didn't belong. He nearly turned back, his boots heavy with the weight of a life that didn't fit here. Then he thought of Sophie's last hearing test, her small voice asking the doctor, "Did I fail?" His jaw tightened and he stepped inside, driven by a father's quiet resolve. A silver-haired man with impeccable posture approached, his eyes flickering over Ethan's worn boots with a subtle wince. May I help you? I have an appointment, under Van Hart. The man blinked, then summoned a practiced smile. Of course, sir. Right this way. As Ethan followed, the weight of the moment settled over him, a step into a world he'd left behind, now reclaimed for a purpose that felt bigger than himself. Lila's eyes traced Ethan from head to toe, taking in the black Italian wool suit, the crisp white shirt, the open collar, a quiet rebellion against convention. The ensemble was understated, masculine, pristine. But it wasn't the fabric that made her pause. It was the way he wore it, like a man who'd once wielded power and walked away without regret, his shoulders carrying the weight of a past he didn't mourn. You clean up well, she said, her voice neutral, betraying nothing. Ethan smirked, a glint of defiance in his eyes. Amazing what a billionaire's budget can do. Did you choose the open collar? I don't wear nooses, he replied, his tone steady, unapologetic. Lila allowed a faint smile, sharp as a crescent moon. Good. I don't date men who choke to fit in. Ethan arched a brow, his voice dry. Are we dating now? She stepped closer, her presence a quiet storm, her gaze unwavering. No, but for one night the world might think so, and I need you to walk like you belong there. I don't have to walk like I belong, he said, his voice low, resolute. I know I don't. But that doesn't mean I'll flinch. Their eyes locked, a tempest meeting a wildfire, neither yielding. Lila turned slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper, intimate yet dangerous. Do you know what makes men like Julian sweat? Ethan's answer came swift, unflinching. A man who doesn't need them. Lila nodded, a spark of approval in her eyes. Then let's give him a reason to panic. The words hung between them, a vow sealed in shared defiance, setting the stage for a night that would shift their worlds. That evening, Ethan pushed open the door to his modest apartment, the sleek black folder from Lila tucked under his arm. Inside, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, building a sprawling city from empty cereal boxes, her small hands arranging towers with care. She looked up, her eyes bright as stars. Did the lady give you the job? Yeah, Ethan said softly, setting the folder on the worn kitchen table. But it's not a job. What is it? She asked, tilting her head. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle as a whisper. It's just one night, kiddo. I'm going to wear a fancy suit, eat tiny food, and pretend to be someone people don't ignore. Sophie frowned, her brow furrowing. But I don't ignore you. His heart cracked open, and he smiled, warm and true. I know, Sophie, and that's why this is going to be okay. She paused, her small fingers clutching a cereal box. Will they like you? Ethan looked at her, his gaze long and quiet, the weight of her questions settling deep. They don't have to, he said, his voice steady, defining the path ahead. I'm not going there to be liked. I'm going to remind someone what they lost. His words echoed in the small room, a promise to himself as much as to her, anchoring him to the man he was becoming. The mirror in the private suite of Grayson and Cole Taylor's didn't lie, but it wavered, as if unsure of the man it reflected. Ethan Caldwell stood stiffly on the circular platform, staring at a stranger, a version of himself buried years ago beneath broken dreams, sleepless nights, and the echo of Sophie's cries through paper-thin walls. The tailor, a silver-haired man with meticulous hands, adjusted the cuff of the midnight blue suit, its fabric impossibly smooth against Ethan's skin. Does it feel tight, sir? He asked, his voice soft as velvet. Ethan flexed his shoulders, testing the fit. No, just strange. The suit didn't just fit his body, it fit his past, conjuring a man who'd never fallen, who'd never lost. He turned slightly, catching his profile in the mirror. The lines on his face remained, etched by years of struggle. The weariness in his eyes hadn't faded, but somehow he looked unbroken, resolute. Do you still want the collar open? The tailor asked. Ethan nodded, his voice firm. If I'm wearing your war paint, I'll keep one scar visible. From behind him, Lila's voice cut through the stillness, sharp as a blade. You say that like elegance is deception. He met her eyes in the mirror, unflinching. Isn't it? She stepped into the suite, arms crossed, her heels silent against the plush floor, her expression steady but layered with something deeper. No, deception is pretending you don't feel anything. Elegance is knowing exactly what you feel and choosing not to show it. The air between them tightened, a silent challenge that drew them closer. Ethan turned slowly, facing her fully, his gaze steady. Then what am I right now? Elegance or a lie in expensive thread count? Lila's eyes studied him with a precision that felt both clinical and intimate, searching for the man beneath the suit. You're a man reclaiming something, she said. Not power, not pride, just presence. Ethan exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, her words sinking deep. She approached, her fingers brushing the lapel of his jacket, smoothing it with care before tapping once on his chest, a gesture that felt like a contract. Stand straight, don't drop your gaze, and if anyone asks who you are, say you're the man she couldn't replace. Lila blinked, not from surprise, but because his words mirrored her own unspoken thoughts, a weapon honed for Julian's undoing. That line, she murmured, will ruin a man like him. Ethan gave a dry smile, his voice low. Then I'll keep it in my pocket for dessert. She stepped back, nodding, a flicker of respect in her eyes. You'll pass. He raised an eyebrow. Pass for what? For someone who doesn't belong to the background. A pause hung between them, A moment where neither moved, the air thick with unspoken understanding. As Lila turned to leave, Ethan's voice stopped her. "You talk like a woman who's used to being alone in a room full of people?" She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes softening for a fleeting second. "That's because I am." Her words lingered, a quiet confession that bound them further, as Ethan realized he was stepping into more than a charade. Later that night, Ethan stood before the bathroom mirror in his small apartment, the midnight blue suit glowing under the harsh yellow light. Sophie leaned against the doorframe, her eyes wide with wonder. "You look like a superhero," she whispered, her voice full of awe. He smiled, crouching to fix the hem of her pajama sleeve. "I don't think superheroes wear loafers." She giggled, undeterred. "But you look like someone important." His heart ached at her words, so pure, so certain. "I'm going to a wedding, remember?" "Will there be cake?" "Probably." "Will they know you?" He paused, then shook his head. "No, but they'll know I don't need to be known." Sophie tilted her head, puzzled. "That sounds confusing." Ethan chuckled softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. "It means I'm not going there to impress anyone. I'm going because someone invited me, and for the first time in a long while, I think someone actually saw me." Sophie's eyes lit up. "The lady with the shiny shoes?" He grinned, warmth spreading through him. "Yeah, her." She stepped closer, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Well, I see you every day, and you're already my favorite person." He held her tightly, his voice barely a whisper. "That's the only vote that counts, kiddo." The moment wrapped around them, a quiet promise that carried him toward the night ahead. The next morning, Lila sat in her private office at Van Hart Tower, scanning emails without truly seeing them. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with its relentless rhythm, but inside, something in her was unsettled. Ethan Caldwell, the way he spoke, the way he refused to shrink, haunted her thoughts. He didn't chase approval, didn't bend to the unspoken rules of her world. Yet in that suit, he looked like he'd been born to it. She replayed their conversation, his words echoing in her mind. "I'm not here to impress anyone." Her own response followed. "Then let's give him a reason to panic." She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but around him, her carefully crafted armor slipped, revealing glimpses of something real. Her assistant Claire knocked once and entered. "Final RSVP list is confirmed. Press will be outside. Rumors say Julian invited 3 different media outlets." Lila didn't blink, her voice steady. "Let him. He wants a show. We'll give him a headline he can't swallow." Claire hesitated, her tone cautious. "Ma'am, may I ask something personal? This man you're bringing, Ethan Caldwell, is he a distraction? A strategic variable?" Lila's response came swiftly, too swift. "Both." But as Claire left, Lila remained still, staring out at the city's skyline. A strategic variable? Then why did Ethan feel like the first thing in years that didn't need a plan? Her thoughts churned, a quiet storm brewing within her, as the weight of their shared mission settled deeper. That night, Lila and Ethan sat across from each other in a small, dimly lit restaurant she'd reserved for a quiet pre-event dinner, the wedding less than 48 hours away. A server offered wine. Ethan declined with a shake of his head. Lila didn't press, her eyes studying him instead, tracing the lines of a man who carried his past like a shield. "You don't drink," she observed, her voice soft but curious. "Not in suits," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Old habit. When you're trying to hold everything together, clarity is a survival skill." She nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on him, seeing not just the man before her, but the strength beneath his quiet demeanor. "You're not like anyone I've ever worked with." "I'm not working for you," he said, his voice warm, steady. "I'm showing up with you." The distinction hung between them, fragile and sacred, a thread tying their fates closer. Lila leaned forward, her voice low. "You'll need to brace yourself. This isn't just about Julian. His fiancée Clara comes from the Beaumont family. They'll dissect you with their eyes before you even shake a hand." Ethan took a sip of water, unfazed. "Let them. I've been dissected, picked apart, laughed at. And you know what?" Lila leaned in, her breath catching. What? I'm still here. The silence that followed was deeper, heavier, a moment where their shared resilience became a quiet bond. Lila looked at him, really looked, and something within her settled, a rare stillness in a life of constant motion. For the first time in years, she wasn't just building walls. She was standing beside someone who saw through them without needing to tear them down. You don't flinch, Lila whispered, her voice barely audible, as if the confession might unravel her. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady, kind. I used to, he said softly, until flinching got me nowhere. Her gaze held his, a spark of recognition passing between them. You're going to break that wedding wide open, Ethan Caldwell. He smiled, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty that felt like bedrock. I'm not going to break anything, he said. I'm just going to show up, and sometimes that's enough to crack the whole foundation. His words settled over her, a truth she hadn't expected to feel so deeply, as the night drew them closer to the storm they'd face together. The Ravenswood Manor shimmered beneath a sky laced with silver clouds, the dying sunlight casting a golden glow over manicured hedges and glowing chandeliers that flickered through arched windows. Valet attendants in crisp tuxedos moved with robotic precision, opening car doors as if choreographed. Lila's car rolled to a stop just beyond the red carpet, the air thick with anticipation. She sat in silence, her hands resting calmly in her lap, but her eyes, always so carefully guarded, flickered with something Ethan hadn't seen before. Not fear, not nerves, but the quiet burn of a memory that still scorched her soul. He broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. You can still call it off. She turned to him, her voice steady but low, a steel thread beneath her calm. And let him win without even showing up? Ethan offered a small nod, his eyes steady. Just making sure you know, whatever happens in there, I don't flinch. Lila gave a soft laugh, more exhale than sound, a rare crack in her armor. I'm starting to believe you. Her words hung like a quiet vow, sealing their alliance as they prepared to step into the fire together. The car door swung open, and the night erupted into a frenzy of flashbulbs. The paparazzi poised like vultures hungry for a story. Lila murmured, "Showtime," her voice a low hum of defiance, then stepped into the blinding lights. Ethan followed, and the air shifted, charged with a quiet electricity. Gasps rippled through the crowd, conversations stumbling mid-sentence. The woman they'd expected to fade into the shadows of a broken engagement had arrived, radiant in black silk, her neckline a seamless blend of elegance and armor. Lila Van Hart moved with calm purpose, her presence a force that demanded attention, yet it was the man beside her who stole their breath. Ethan Caldwell, a stranger to their world, didn't shrink or falter. He simply existed, his quiet strength making it impossible to look away. Their entrance wasn't just an arrival, it was a declaration, a storm breaking over Ravenswood Manor's gilded facade. Inside, the grand hall gleamed with gold accents, a cathedral of luxury designed to awe and intimidate. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished floors, where wealth whispered in every detail. Julian Warwick stood near the stage, his arm draped around his bride, Clara Beaumont, her blonde hair and porcelain smile crafted to perfection, a vision of curated grace. But when Lila entered, Julian's composure cracked, a flicker of shock betraying his polished veneer. He hadn't expected her, not like this, not with a man who carried himself like a storm cloaked in quiet. Lila strode toward them, her steps deliberate, Ethan a silent shadow at her side, his presence impossible to ignore. The room seemed to hold its breath, watching the collision of past and present. Lila's voice cut through the tension, cool and clipped. Julian, Clara. Clara's smile was rehearsed, saccharine. Lila, what a surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come. Lila's eyes glinted, sharp as a blade. I always honor a formal invitation, especially when it's dressed as a provocation. Julian coughed, recovering with a strained smile. You look well. I do, Lila replied, her voice smooth as ice. Grief agrees with me. A stunned silence fell, the words landing like a spark in dry grass, igniting the air with unspoken challenge. Clara's eyes flicked to Ethan, curiosity laced with unease. "And your friend?" Before Ethan could speak, Lila turned to him, offering her hand as if presenting a king to a court of skeptics. "This is Ethan Caldwell, not a hedge fund mogul, not a legacy donor, just someone I met on a Tuesday who proved more unforgettable than half this room combined." Ethan nodded, his voice calm, polite. "Pleasure." Julian extended a stiff hand, his grip betraying a flicker of unease. Ethan shook it with measured calm. No smile, no posturing, just presence, steady and unyielding. Clara tilted her head, her voice probing. "You look familiar. Have we met?" Ethan's response was smooth, unbothered, a quiet blade of truth. "You've probably met my shadow. He shows up where people forget who they've stepped on." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Julian stared, his composure fraying. Lila's smile was subtle, lethal. "Enjoy the evening," she said softly. "You've both earned it." She turned, not with anger, but with the grace of someone who'd already forgiven the room for underestimating her, leaving a wake of whispers as they moved away, champagne glasses pressed into their hands by waiters who suddenly remembered deference. Ethan leaned toward Lila, his voice low, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "That line back there, about Tuesday." She grinned, sipping her champagne, her guard softening for a moment. "Which one?" "The part about me being unforgettable. I told the truth." His eyes glinted, catching the light. "Careful, Lila. That almost sounded like affection." She tilted her head, her smile sharp but warm. "Don't let it go to your head. It was well delivered. You make an excellent sword." Ethan laughed, a low, genuine sound that cut through the room's artifice. "And you make a terrifying queen." The words hung between them, a playful acknowledgement of their shared defiance, binding them closer as they navigated the gilded battlefield. For the next hour, Lila moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd memorized the map of power years ago, her words precise, her presence commanding. Ethan stayed by her side, sometimes silent, sometimes cutting with surgical precision, and the room noticed. Not because he spoke often, but because he didn't need to. In a world built on posturing, his quiet strength was unnerving, a presence that refused to fade into the background. At one point, a board chairman leaned toward Lila, his voice low, probing. "He's not like the usual types you bring." She didn't blink, her response swift and sure. "Exactly." Her words were a shield, a declaration that Ethan was no mere accessory, but a choice that redefined her. Near the grand piano, Julian watched, his eyes fixed on them, despite Clara's attempts to draw him into introductions. Lila had expected resentment, perhaps even disdain, but what she hadn't anticipated was the flicker of regret in his gaze, a crack in the facade of his triumph. The moment crystallized when the orchestra struck up a waltz, its notes weaving through the air like a call to battle. Ethan turned to her, offering his hand, his voice steady but warm. "Would you like to dance?" Lila hesitated, not from doubt, but because it had been years since anyone had asked her anything without an agenda. She nodded, her fingers finding his, and they moved together under the chandeliers, his hand firm on her back, her steps precise yet soft. There was no performance, no spectacle, just two souls who, for a fleeting moment, fit perfectly. "You're good at this," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the music. "Spent a few years dancing in circles," he replied softly. "Different kind, but it trained me." She smiled, genuine and unguarded. "You're not rattled." "I was," he admitted, his voice low, intimate. "But then I realized none of them matter." "Not really." Her eyes met his, searching. "What does matter?" He didn't answer immediately, letting the music carry them for a moment. Then he spoke, his words a quiet thunder that would linger long after the notes faded. "That you showed up tonight not to be seen, but to finally stop disappearing." The truth of it struck her deep, a revelation she'd been too proud to face, binding them in a moment that felt like a turning point. The music faded, But Ethan's words echoed in Lila's chest, a truth she couldn't shake. As they stepped off the dance floor, Julian approached alone, his polished exterior fraying, his voice unsteady. "Lila, can we speak for a moment?" Ethan moved a step back, but Lila's hand grazed his arm, a silent plea. "Stay." She turned to Julian, her voice firm, final. "We've already spoken, Julian. You just didn't listen." He faltered, grasping for control. "This isn't about the past. It's about closure." She cut him off, her words sharp as a blade. "You don't get to rewrite the ending. You left, and tonight I walked into your wedding and didn't fall apart. That's all the closure either of us needs." Julian's eyes flicked to Ethan, searching for weakness. But for the first time that night, he blinked first, his confidence crumbling under Ethan's steady gaze. As Julian retreated, Lila let out a slow breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. Ethan leaned in, his voice low, a hint of humor softening the edge. Was that as satisfying as it looked? She didn't smile, didn't speak. Instead, she reached for his hand, holding it not for the room's eyes, but because, for the first time in years, she didn't care who was watching. Her touch was a quiet rebellion, a tether to something real in a world of artifice. By the time the music died and the last champagne glasses were cleared, Ravenswood Manor felt less like a wedding and more like the aftermath of a silent war, its opulence scarred by the weight of unspoken truths. Lila and Ethan walked out beneath a velvet sky, her heels clicking on stone, headlights waiting like sentinels at the curb. Neither spoke, the silence between them not awkward but heavy, charged with the gravity of what they'd just done. When they reached the car, Lila turned to him, arms loosely crossed, her voice low, almost vulnerable. "You held your ground." Ethan leaned against the door, hands in his pockets, his gaze steady. "You expected I wouldn't." "No," she admitted, her eyes searching his. "I just wasn't sure how much ground you had left." Her words landed like truth often does, quiet, undeniable, stripping away pretense. Ethan tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "There's always ground. Sometimes it's just buried under rubble." Lila opened the car door, paused, then looked back at him, her voice softer now, unguarded. "Do you want to go home, Ethan? Or do you want to know why you were the perfect person for tonight?" He didn't hesitate, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity. "I want to know." The words sealed their night, a bridge to a conversation that would unravel more than either expected, as they stepped into the car and into the unknown together. Lila arched an eyebrow, her gaze sharp yet curious, as if peering into the corners of Ethan's soul. "And you look like someone who's always packed a bag in their head." Ethan's smile was faint, a flicker of acknowledgement that carried the weight of years. "You're not wrong." She crossed to the bar, her movements fluid, deliberate, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon without asking, offering one with a quiet confidence. Ethan took it, the amber liquid catching the light as he sipped, the burn grounding him in the moment. A silence settled, not rushed but patient, the kind that waits for buried pain to rise on its own terms. Lila's voice broke the quiet, softer than usual, as if it had aged in the span of a single night. "Do you know the worst part of being left? It's not the humiliation, it's the silence. The way people whisper like you're fragile porcelain, too afraid to meet your eyes because they might see the cracks." Ethan didn't interrupt, his steady gaze inviting her to continue. She pressed on, her words raw, unguarded. "When Julian left, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I worked. I bought another building, closed a merger, walked into boardrooms full of men waiting for me to break. But I didn't." Her eyes met his, searching, vulnerable. Ethan's voice was gentle, a quiet anchor. "Did you?" The question wasn't judgment. It was an invitation to truth, and it tethered them closer in the stillness of her penthouse. Lila turned toward him, her silhouette framed against the glittering Manhattan skyline, her voice steady but heavy with realization. "No, but something shifted, not in me, around me. People changed their tone, their posture. It wasn't sympathy, it was calculation. They thought pain had weakened me. Ethan studied her, his eyes tracing the strength she wore like armor, seeing the woman beneath it. But pain didn't weaken you, did it? No, she said, her gaze locking onto his, fierce yet fragile. It made me quiet, and sometimes quiet women scare the loudest men. He set his glass down, the soft clink echoing in the room. You brought me here to thank me, he said, his voice low, probing. But something tells me there's more. Lila moved to the center of the room, pulling a sleek black folder from a drawer and placing it on the coffee table between them, its presence a silent challenge. You said you scrubbed your name, that you used to be someone else. Ethan's shoulders tensed, his jaw tightening, but he held his silence. I looked anyway, she continued, her voice steady but edged with urgency. And I couldn't find you. No LinkedIn, no press, no court records, not even a suspended business license. Just a name with no shadow. Ethan exhaled, long and slow, the sound heavy with a past he'd buried. You did your homework. I had to, she said, her eyes unwavering. Because I know what it means to erase yourself. It doesn't happen without blood. Their words hung like a taut wire, binding their shared wounds in the quiet of the night. Ethan sat across from her, his hands resting on his knees, calloused and worn, a map of battles fought and lost. You want the truth? Yes, Lila said, her voice a quiet demand. He looked down at his hands, then back up, his eyes steady, resolute. 5 years ago, I founded a startup, a real one, nothing flashy, just solid infrastructure, smart code, a clean business model. I had a partner. We built fast, grew fast, too fast. His voice hardened, the words falling like stones. He sold me out. Behind my back, he took a buyout from a major firm, one tied to a holding group I didn't know about. He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. Van Hart Enterprises. The room froze. The glass, the skyline, Lila's breath. Ethan's voice softened, not with accusation but with clarity. You didn't know. I can see that now. Lila sat slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table, as if to anchor herself. My name was on the acquisition. I was the silent arm in the deal. Ethan nodded, his voice steady but heavy. Your partner signed everything, but your firm processed the buyout. It was clean, legal, but it bled me dry. Lila stared at the city lights as if they could erase the past. I lost everything, he continued, his words raw, unadorned. The company, my savings, my home, my wife. She left 6 months later, said she didn't sign up for struggle. Took Sophie with her for a while. I fought like hell to get her back. A pause heavy with the weight of memory. And now you're here, Lila said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. In my penthouse, wearing my money. Ethan's smile was faint, tinged with irony. Life's got a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it? The truth settled between them, a bridge built on shared loss, fragile yet unyielding. Lila stood and crossed to the window, her silhouette stark against the city's glow. I didn't know, Ethan, she said, her voice raw, not to escape guilt, but to lay bare her truth. If I'd seen your name, your face, your company, I would have questioned that deal. He watched her, his gaze steady, measuring. You're not responsible, he said, but you're part of it. That's the difference. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his, vulnerable yet resolute. So what happens now? Ethan rose to his feet, his presence filling the room. That depends on whether this was all just theater for your ex, or if you meant what you said when you told him I wasn't someone you could replace. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. Lila's voice, softer than he'd ever heard, broke it. I meant it. Ethan walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle, his voice low, weighted with truth. When someone takes everything from you, you don't get to choose what justice looks like. You just pray for one good day. He turned to her, his eyes steady. Tonight was a good day. And with that, he left, leaving Lila alone in the glow of her empire, grappling with the realization that its foundations were built on someone else's ruins. The moment lingered, a turning point that would echo in the days to come. The next morning, the sun pierced the clouds like a reluctant truth, beautiful but too bright for the weight of the mood. Ethan sat on the fire escape of his apartment, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, the city below murmuring with early deliveries, barking dogs, and a bus perpetually 5 minutes late. Inside, Sophie slept, tangled in tattered pink sheets, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. The night before played in Ethan's mind like a song without a chorus. Standing in the heart of privilege, surrounded by ghosts in tuxedos, watching a woman who'd unknowingly shaped his downfall reach for something that felt like redemption. Now he was adrift, not broken, but unmoored, caught in the aftermath of truce laid bare. His phone buzzed. Lila Van Hart. He stared at the name before answering, his voice rough with fatigue. Morning. I didn't sleep, she replied, her tone raw, unguarded. Didn't ask you to. A pause stretched, heavy with unspoken weight. I keep thinking about what you said, she continued, her voice softening, that you don't choose what justice looks like, only hope for a good day. Ethan waited, letting her words settle. I realized, she said, I've never had one. Not the kind that comes from peace, only from power. He stayed silent, his silence an invitation. Her voice tightened, a thread of resolve beneath the vulnerability. Would it make a difference if I tried to fix what happened to you? Ethan's laugh was quiet, tinged with weariness. You don't fix something like that. You outlive it. But maybe I don't want to be the kind of woman who just outlives things anymore. His expression hardened, his voice steady. Then be the kind who looks it in the eye. The words hung between them, a challenge that lingered as the city woke below. Silence followed, thick with unspoken truths. Ethan, Lila said, her voice hesitating, a rare tremor of withheld truth. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. Say it. Her words came carefully, like glass placed on marble. I pulled the acquisition files from the archives. There's a name I didn't expect. Your ex-partner, he didn't just sell you out. He was paid extra to do it, and the person who authorized it was my father. Ethan stood, the mug cracking slightly under his grip, his jaw clenched. Your father? Yes, she whispered. Not a board member, not an advisor, my blood. I didn't know, she added, her voice barely audible. He used ghost entities, his own war games. Always has. Ethan paced the narrow ledge, his voice low, bitter. So I wasn't even a target, just collateral damage. Yes. And you thought telling me this would help? I thought not telling you would be worse. He stopped pacing, his voice cutting through the morning air. You think this changes anything? Lila's voice cracked, just slightly. It should. No, Ethan said, his tone final. It just completes the circle. He hung up, the silence that followed heavier than the city's noise. A wound reopened, but not yet healed. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood outside the community center, where Sophie attended her after-school drawing class. The mural on the sidewall, faded but beautiful, depicted 100 tiny handprints forming a single tree, a testament to hope in a worn-out world. A woman approached from the parking lot, dressed simply but sharply. Lila. Ethan didn't move, his gaze steady but guarded. How did you find me? I asked your doorman, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He likes me better than you do. Ethan turned to her, slowly, his voice low. I told you everything you needed to know last night. Lila stepped closer, her eyes earnest, unguarded. No, you told me everything that hurt, not everything that mattered. He looked away, his jaw tightening, but she pressed on, her voice softening. You said people don't flinch when they've lost everything. But maybe flinching isn't weakness. Maybe it's proof we still feel. Ethan stayed silent, his silence a wall she refused to climb. You showed up for me when I needed someone to steady the room, she continued. You held the line when the floor beneath me cracked. I didn't bring you into my world to ruin yours. His voice was flat, but not cruel. You didn't ruin it. You just reminded me what it felt like to lose it twice. Lila's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with restraint, a quiet strength holding her together. I can't change the past, she said, but I can fight for the future. I can expose what my father did. Clean house. Make sure no one else gets caught in his shadows. Ethan studied her, his gaze searching. Why for me? Not for you, she said, her voice fierce yet tender. For myself. Because if I don't, everything I've built is just a throne on someone else's bones. The words landed like a vow, a promise to rewrite the legacy she carried. Ethan let out a slow breath, the weight of her words settling over him. Before he could respond, Sophie burst through the doors, waving a colorful drawing. Daddy, look! I drew a princess on a motorcycle. Ethan knelt, taking the paper with a smile that softened his edges. Fastest royal in the kingdom. Sophie spotted Lila, her eyes bright with curiosity. Is that your friend with the shiny shoes? Lila's smile was warm, genuine. That's me. Are you coming to my birthday party? Sophie asked, undeterred. Ethan and Lila exchanged a glance, a fleeting moment of connection amidst the tension. Sophie grinned, unbothered. I want cake with strawberries and no grown-up talking. Lila's voice softened, her guard dropping. I'll try, but I might be late. Sophie nodded solemnly, as if that was a fair compromise. Ethan stood, his gaze returning to Lila, the weight of their conversation still hanging between them. The moment felt fragile, a crossroads where pain and possibility met, setting the stage for what was to come. Lila's eyes met Ethan's, steady and unguarded, her voice soft but resolute. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ethan. I'm asking for the chance to stand beside you, not as your fixer, but maybe one day as your friend. He held her gaze for a long moment, the weight of her words settling like a quiet tide. His voice when it came was low, deliberate, a door cracked open. You've got one shot. Her lips curved faintly, a spark of hope in her eyes. That's all I need. For the first time since they met, neither looked away. Their shared silence, a fragile bridge built on trust, a promise that carried them beyond the night's chaos into something uncharted but real. The Van Hart Enterprises boardroom had never known a silence so profound. Not the polite kind, but the heavy hush before a storm breaks. 12 men sat rigid at the long mahogany table, veterans of mergers and corporate chess, their lives built on moving pieces that weren't their own. But today, Lila Von Hart wasn't playing games. She wielded a sword. She tapped a folder with deliberate precision, her voice cutting through the tension. I have here a set of confidential acquisitions made under a shell company, Sterling Ventures, all tied to accounts managed off-book by my father, Edward Van Hart. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Several of these, including one 5 years ago targeting a startup called Horizon Core, were conducted under false pretenses, knowingly concealed from public record. An older board member cleared his throat, his voice cautious. Lila, surely you understand. She cut him off, her words sharp as steel. I understand that men like you fear what happens when the truth grows teeth. The room shifted, the air crackling with unease. Lila stood slowly, her presence commanding, unyielding. This isn't a threat. It's a reckoning. We cannot move forward as a company built on stolen ground. The general counsel leaned forward, his tone probing. What do you intend to do? Disclose publicly, she said, her voice unwavering. I've already contacted federal regulators. These acquisitions are under investigation. The damage is done, but the healing begins now, or I walk. The silence that followed was a held breath, the room poised on the edge of upheaval. A slow clap broke the tension, echoing from the corner like a taunt. Edward Von Hart stepped from the shadows behind the glass partition, his presence smooth, predatory, his voice dripping with condescension. Well, the air grows claws. Leela didn't flinch, her eyes locking onto his. You shouldn't be here. I built this company and I'm saving it from the man who corrupted it. He moved closer, his steps deliberate, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. You think you're noble? You think rewriting history makes you righteous? I'm not rewriting, she said, her voice a blade of clarity. I'm releasing it. Edward stopped 2 feet from her, his gaze cold, calculating. You don't survive in this world by being good, Lila. You survive by being useful. She met his eyes, unwavering, her resolve like iron. Then I'd rather be extinct. Turning to the board, she laid her ultimatum bare. My resignation is on the table. So is my fight for integrity. You don't get both. Choose. Less than 10 minutes later, the vote was unanimous. Edward's advisory and legacy roles were stripped, his access revoked, his name erased from every conference room wall. Lila didn't smile. She exhaled. The weight of a legacy lifted, the air sharp with the promise of renewal. That night, Lila didn't return to the glittering penthouse or the polished world she'd built. Instead, she stood before a worn red brick building on the Lower East Side, Ethan's home. He opened the door, dressed in an old hoodie. Sophie balanced on his hip, a toothbrush dangling from her mouth. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lila, who wore jeans and a t-shirt, no makeup, no armor, just a woman stripped bare by truth. "Hi," Lila said softly, almost hesitant. Ethan looked her over, his voice dry but not unkind. "Bad time?" "Never," he said, stepping aside. Inside, Sophie skipped off to rinse, calling from the bathroom, "I'm going to draw a rocket raccoon who eats broccoli." Ethan smiled, a warmth softening his edges. "She's trying to make vegetables sound cooler." Lila chuckled faintly, the sound genuine, unguarded. "She's persuasive." They sat at the kitchen table, a single bulb overhead casting a warm, flickering glow. "I did it," Lila said, her voice quiet but firm. "I took him down." "Hum." Ethan didn't respond immediately, his eyes searching hers. "How do you feel?" "Like I broke a window that's been painted shut for years. There's air now, but it's cold." He nodded, his voice steady. "That's what truth feels like at first. Cold before it heals." Lila's gaze softened, her voice barely a whisper. "I think I needed you to remind me I could still feel it." Ethan stirred his coffee slowly, his words measured. "I used to think healing meant getting things back. Now I think it's about letting go of what broke you." Her eyes held his, a quiet revelation dawning. "Why are you so good with words?" He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I ran out of excuses a long time ago, so I started telling the truth." The silence that followed was warm, unpressured, a rare moment of peace between two souls who'd fought too long to find it. Sophie wandered out, sleep still heavy in her eyes, her voice bright with curiosity. "Are you staying for a bedtime story?" Lila blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. "Would that be okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Only if you do voices." Ethan grinned, his eyes glinting with pride. "She's got standards." Lila laughed, not her polished chuckle, but a real, unguarded sound that filled the room with warmth. They curled up on the old couch, Sophie nestled between them, as Lila read a story about a lion who lost his roar and found it again in the most unexpected way. Her voice faltered only once on the line. "Even lions need someone to remind them who they really are." Ethan looked at her then, not as the CEO who'd cost him a company or conquered a boardroom, but as a woman who'd finally come home to herself. As he walked her to the door later, Lila turned to him, her voice soft, vulnerable. "I don't know what this is, or where it's going." Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and kind. "Neither do I. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." In that moment, with no contracts or conditions, she leaned in, her forehead resting against his. Not a kiss, but a shared breath. A quiet vow between two people who'd lost too much to let something true slip away. Just before midnight, a knock broke the stillness of Ethan's apartment. He just put Sophie to bed, a soft lullaby lingering in the air, the kind that soothed the unspoken storms of parenthood. He paused at the door, then opened it to find Hannah, a ghost from a life he'd left behind. Early 30s, blonde, clad in expensive boots, her beauty worn thin by years of broken promises. "Hi, Ethan," she said, her smile fragile, failing to reach her eyes. His voice was a whisper of steel. "Hannah, can I come in?" He didn't move, his gaze unwavering. "What do you want?" Her eyes flicked nervously around the hallway. "Just to talk. 5 minutes." He hesitated, then stepped aside, the air heavy with the weight of their past. Hannah stepped in, drawn to the photos on the side shelf. Sophie in a cardboard crown, another with Ethan, icing smeared on their noses from a birthday long past. Her face tightened, a flicker of pain crossing her features. She looks happy. She is, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady. I've been in rehab. Twice. I know. I thought about Sophie every day. He nodded once, his expression unyielding. Thinking's not the same as showing up. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. I want to see her. Ethan didn't flinch. You walked out when she couldn't even tie her shoes. I was sick. You were selfish, he said calmly, his words cutting with truth, not anger. And sick. The two aren't exclusive. Her voice cracked, a raw edge breaking through. She's my daughter. She's my daughter now. You forfeited that when you signed over custody without blinking. The silence that followed was heavy, a chasm of lost years. Hannah backed toward the door, her voice trembling. I wasn't in my right mind. Ethan's gaze didn't soften, but his tone held no malice, only truth. And now you are. That's good. But don't confuse recovery with redemption. They're different roads. She paused, her hand on the doorframe, her voice softer now. There's someone in your life now. I saw her name in the papers. Lila Van Hart, CEO turned saint. The internet loves a makeover. Ethan's jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing. If you're here to start trouble, I'm not interested. She softened, her voice barely audible. I just wanted to see you, to say I'm sorry, even if you'll never believe it. Ethan leaned against the table, his hands clasped tightly, his voice measured. I believe in apologies, but only when they come with changed behavior, not just changed words. Hannah nodded slowly, reaching into her coat to hand him a folded envelope. My number. If Sophie ever wants to ask questions, I'm brave enough to answer. He took it without a word, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. As she stepped out, she turned one last time. She looks like me. Ethan's eyes met hers, unflinching. No, she looks like hope, and hope looks like whoever fights for it. The door closed, leaving the weight of her return to linger in the quiet, a reminder of battles fought in the fragile peace Ethan had built. The next morning, Lila sat in the corner booth of an old diner Ethan used to visit with Sophie on weekends, her cream sweater and loosely pulled back hair, a stark contrast to her usual polished armor. She looked less like a CEO and more like someone searching for the warmth of something real. Ethan slid into the seat opposite her, his eyes heavy with the weight of the night before. You look like you haven't slept, she said, her voice soft but observant. He stirred his coffee slowly, his voice rough. Hannah came by last night. Lila's eyes sharpened, but her tone remained even, a quiet strength holding her steady. The revelation hung between them, a new thread in the tapestry of their shared story, pulling them toward a future neither could yet define. The ex, Lila said, her voice steady but her eyes sharpening with quiet concern. She wants to see Sophie. Ethan stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug, his gaze distant yet resolute. Lila didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of his words settle in the diner's warm glow. What did you say? She asked finally, her tone gentle but probing. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady, unyielding. That she doesn't get to walk in and rewrite the ending, just because she regrets the middle. Lila nodded slowly, a faint smile touching her lips, not from amusement but from recognition of his clarity. That's a good line. It wasn't a line, he said, his voice low, firm. It was truth. They sat in silence as the waitress set a plate of pancakes before Sophie, who was tucked in a nearby booth, her crayons dancing across a drawing of a rocket with flowers for exhaust. Lila glanced at her, then back at Ethan, her voice softening. She'll ask about her mother someday. I know, Ethan replied, his gaze steady but heavy with the weight of that inevitability. What will you tell her? The truth, he said, his voice gentle yet unwavering. But softly. I'll tell her some people love with all they have, and sometimes all they have isn't enough. Lila swallowed, her throat tightening, her eyes searching his. Do you think that's true of me too? Ethan's gaze held hers, kind but unflinching. No, you've never loved halfway. You just didn't know where to aim it. The words landed like a quiet revelation, stirring something deep within her, a truth she hadn't dared to face. Lila blinked quickly, her smile barely there, fragile but real. And now? Ethan leaned back, his voice warm, steady. Now you're learning, and so am I. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small hand-drawn card, its edges worn from Sophie's careful hands. Lila opened it, her breath catching at the sight of Sophie's crooked, colorful letters. Thank you for making Daddy laugh again. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears but with a quiet awe, as if holding something sacred. She made it herself, Ethan said, his voice soft, proud. Didn't even tell me. Lila ran her thumb gently across the paper, her touch reverent, as if it were more fragile than any contract she'd ever signed. I don't know if I deserve this. Ethan tilted his head, his smile deep, not wide. Maybe not yet, but she thinks you do, and that's a good place to start. Lila folded the card carefully, her fingers lingering on its edges, her eyes meeting his with a quiet resolve. You said once that healing isn't about getting back what you lost, but letting go of what broke you. I still believe that, he said, his voice steady, a bedrock of truth. Then maybe we can both let go of what didn't serve us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, of the people we had to be to survive. Ethan's smile deepened, a quiet promise in his eyes. Maybe we already are. The moment hung between them, a fragile thread of hope weaving their paths closer, a shared journey toward something new. At that moment, Sophie bounced over, clutching her drawing, her eyes bright with pride. I added a parachute in case the rocket gets scared. Ethan chuckled, the sound warm, grounding. Smart thinking. Lila leaned down, her voice soft, playful. Even the strongest rockets need a soft way back to Earth. Sophie beamed, her smile lighting up the diner. Do you want to color the next one with me? Lila blinked, caught off guard by the invitation, her heart stirring. I'd love to. As they sat there, Ethan watching the two people who'd cracked open parts of his soul, he thought long buried. A quiet warmth settled in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the first whispers of it. The city outside breathed in soft blues and golds, caught in that fleeting hour between exhaustion and stillness, when the noise faded enough to hear the heart's quiet rhythm. Ethan stood at the foot of the rooftop stairs, staring up at the soft glow spilling from above. Lila had sent a message earlier. Come up, dress warm. The words carried a weight he couldn't yet name, a call to something beyond the ordinary. He climbed the narrow steps, the door creaking open to reveal Lila sitting cross-legged on a weathered blanket, two thermoses beside her, a galaxy of string lights twinkling overhead. You built a sky, Ethan said, stepping into the soft light, his voice tinged with wonder. Lila looked up, her smile warm, unguarded. No stars in Manhattan. I figured I'd make some. He chuckled, settling beside her on the blanket, the skyline looming behind her, silver towers reaching into the dusk like frozen waves. You didn't have to impress me, you know, he said, unscrewing a thermos lid, the scent of chamomile and honey rising. She handed him a cup, her eyes soft but resolute. It's not for you. It's for me. I've spent my life building things that glitter. Tonight, I wanted to build something that means something. He took a sip, the warmth grounding him. You're changing, he said, his voice quiet, observant. No, she replied softly, her gaze drifting to the city below. I'm just remembering. They sat for a moment, the city blinking beneath them, a silent witness to their shared vulnerability. I used to come up here as a teenager, Lila said, her voice low, reflective. After fights with my father, after every boardroom failure, this was the only place I could take off the mask. Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching. Why are you showing me this? Because you're the first person I've ever wanted to see me without it. Her words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, and Ethan looked at her, really looked, past the poise, past the perfection, seeing the woman who was both afraid and brave in the same breath. You think I'm strong, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but most of the time I'm just performing strength. Ethan didn't blink, his voice steady, kind. Real strength is being seen in your softness and not flinching. Lila exhaled shakily, her eyes glistening with a truth she'd long avoided. Then I want to be strong. He reached over, his hand gently brushing hers, a quiet anchor. Then start here. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred, a space where their wounds could breathe. Lila turned to him, her voice low, almost a whisper. Do you think it's possible for people like us, broken into such different ways, to find something whole? Ethan stared at their hands, his voice soft but certain. I don't think love saves us from the wreckage. I think it's what we find when we stop pretending we were never broken. Her breath caught, his words settling deep within her. I spent years believing I had to earn love by being useful, powerful, needed, she admitted, her voice raw. But with you, I just want to be. Ethan's eyes softened, his voice a quiet vow. And that's exactly enough. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that wasn't grand or cinematic, but quiet, a convergence of breath, memory, and longing, too long deferred. When they parted, Lila's forehead rested against his, her voice a whisper. I'm terrified. So am I, he answered, his tone steady, honest. But let's not run from it this time. The moment wrapped around them, a fragile promise of something true, born from the ashes of their past. Later that week, Ethan, Lila, and Sophie found themselves at a quiet farmer's market on the city's edge, an unplanned escape from the weight of their world. Lila had picked them up in a borrowed car, no security, no chauffeur, just her hair in a ponytail, sunglasses pushed up, laughing as Sophie insisted on buying every jar of strawberry jam they passed. You know this stuff's basically candy in disguise, right? Ethan said, eyeing a mason jar skeptically. Good, Sophie chirped, her eyes bright. Then I won't need dessert. Lila bent down, whispering loudly, Don't tell your dad, but I agree. Ethan raised a brow, his voice dry but warm. Oh, it's like that now? Team Strawberry? Lila stuck out her tongue, and Sophie giggled uncontrollably, the sound of melody that painted the day in color. Ethan watched them, two pieces of his life he never imagined would fit in the same frame, their laughter weaving a fragile hope into the ordinary moment. As they sat on a bench, bags of jam at their feet, Sophie played with a ladybug on her hand, her focus absolute. Lila leaned into Ethan, her voice soft, vulnerable. You know what scares me most? What? That I might actually deserve this. Her eyes shimmered, tears barely held back. It's hard to let something this gentle in after a lifetime of hardness. Ethan's gaze was steady, kind. It's not the gentleness that's scary. It's the silence it brings, because that's when you hear everything you tried to outrun. Lila blinked, quietly undone, her heart laid bare. Sophie climbed onto their laps, sticky fingers and wild hair, her voice bright with certainty. Are we a team now? Ethan froze, the question catching him off guard. But Lila pulled Sophie close without hesitation, her voice warm. Sure. If you'll have me? Sophie nodded, satisfied. Yes. The words sealed their moment, a quiet vow that carried the weight of a new beginning. That night after Sophie had drifted to sleep, Ethan stood at the doorway of her room, the nightlight casting a soft yellow glow. He lingered longer than usual, his heart heavy with the day's revelations. Lila came up behind him, her arms wrapping gently around his waist, her voice a whisper. Is this what healing looks like? Ethan turned, his forehead resting against hers, his voice quiet but certain. No, this is what hope looks like when it finally believes it has a home. The words settled between them, a beacon in the quiet, grounding them in a truth they'd both fought to find. Just after midnight, Ethan's phone blinked with a voicemail, an unknown number from a New Jersey area code. He was finishing a short story, words pouring from him like water through a broken dam, a tale of a man learning to breathe again after forgetting what softness felt like. The call cut through, unyielding. He stared at the screen. Hannah. Pressing play, he braced himself. Hey, I know you said not to call, her voice began, tentative but resolute. But I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about earning redemption. I think I can do that. I met with a family lawyer today. I'm filing for joint custody. I'm not trying to take her away, Ethan. I just want her to know I didn't give up forever. And if it matters, I'm clean. I'm staying clean. You're a good father, but I'm still her mother. That has to count for something. The call ended, and Ethan stood in silence. The nightlights glow steady behind him. He didn't enter Sophie's room, just pressed a hand against the door. The weight of Hannah's words a storm he wasn't ready to face. The next morning, Ethan met Lila at her office, but the air felt off, heavy with unspoken tension. She greeted him with a guarded smile, her assistant hovering nearby with a concerned glance. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet but direct. Lila hesitated, then handed him a tablet, the headline stark and brutal. From janitor to jackpot, single dad seen with CEO after daughter's real mother files custody claim. The words hit like a blow, a public wound laid bare, threatening the fragile hope they'd begun to build. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the screen, the weight of the past crashing into the present, setting the stage for a battle neither had anticipated. Ethan's throat tightened as he read the headline, the words slicing through the morning's fragile calm. From janitor to jackpot, single dad seen with CEO after daughter's real mother files custody claim. The photos were grainy but undeniable. One from the farmer's market, another outside Sophie's school. Moments of joy twisted into a narrative of manipulation. Lila's voice was steady but heavy. "Someone's digging. They're framing it like you're using me to gain leverage in a custody battle." Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the tablet. "I didn't leak anything." "I know," she interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "But optics matter. My board's already on edge after the audit fallout. Now they think you're a liability." His shoulders stiffened, his voice low, controlled. "So, what? Do you want me to disappear until this blows over?" Lila's eyes flickered with uncertainty, a rare crack in her armor. "No," she said, but the word lacked conviction. "I just need to protect what I've rebuilt." Ethan looked at her, really looked, his gaze piercing through her defenses. "And what about what we were building?" Silence fell, heavy and raw. His voice hardened, not with anger but with truth. "You told me you wanted something real, but the second it got messy, you went back to playing it safe." Lila's voice cracked, a quiet plea. "That's not fair." "Maybe not," he said, his eyes steady, unflinching. "But it's honest." The words hung between them, a wound laid bare, as he turned and walked out, leaving the air thick with unspoken regret. That evening, Lila sat alone in her penthouse, the city's glittering lights mocking her like 1,000 blinking reminders of the walls she'd built to survive. She thought of Ethan's eyes as he'd closed the door. Not angry, but tired, a weariness that cut deeper than rage. Her fingers found Sophie's card on the table. "Thank you for making Daddy laugh again." The words trembled in her hands, not just because she'd pushed Ethan away, but because she'd let a child believe she could be trusted, only to retreat when the world pressed too close. "Is this who I still am?" she whispered, her father's voice echoing in her memory. "Control the narrative before it controls you." But Ethan had never cared for narratives. He'd wanted love without performance, a home beyond headlines, and she hadn't known how to give it. Not until she'd lost the one person who saw her as more than her empire. The card felt heavier than any contract, a quiet accusation of her own fear, a mirror to the woman she was afraid she'd never become. Meanwhile, Ethan sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, the alley below cloaked in quiet shadows. Hannah hadn't followed up, but the custody story was snowballing, a lawyer's voicemail about court scheduling lingering unanswered on his phone. None of it cut as deep as Lila's silence, her hesitation when the world turned sharp. He could forgive attacks, weather insults, but being doubted, treated as a calculation, that burned. Sophie padded out in her pajamas, climbing into his lap without a word, her warmth a quiet anchor. After a long pause, she looked up, her voice small but piercing. "Is the nice lady not coming back?" Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "She might need some time." Sophie nodded, her eyes wise beyond her years. "That's okay. Sometimes I need time too, like when I cried in the cafeteria and didn't want anyone to look at me." He kissed her hair, his voice soft. I know. She tilted her head up, her gaze steady. But you waited anyway. You just sat there till I was ready. Ethan's smile was faint, heavy with truth. Maybe that was love, not fixing, not chasing, but waiting with quiet presence. A lesson Sophie taught him in her innocence, one he hoped Lila might still learn. The next afternoon, Ethan found a letter slipped under his door. No return address, just a single sheet of expensive paper in Lila's tight, elegant script, the ink betraying a hand that had trembled. Ethan, I said I needed time. What I should have said is I needed courage, and I didn't have enough when it mattered most. You were never the liability, my fear was. You didn't cost me my legacy. You reminded me I'm more than one. Sophie gave me a drawing, a rocket with a parachute. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. She was teaching me what you already knew. Sometimes the only way to fly is to trust where you'll land. If you can forgive me, not quickly but truly, I'd like to try again, not as your solution or project, but as a woman learning to stay when it's hard. I miss the way you breathe when you're not pretending to be fine. I miss how Sophie says strawberry jam like a queen. Mostly, I miss the sound of our quiet. Lila. Ethan read it twice, each word sinking deep, then folded it carefully, tucking it into his pocket. He looked up at the darkening sky, not starless, and felt the stirrings of something unbroken, a hope that refused to fade. The court date came and went, a quiet affair. Hannah never appeared, her lawyer explaining she'd withdrawn the custody petition after careful reconsideration. Ethan didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. Sometimes closure wasn't a confrontation, but a choice to stop bleeding into old wounds. He walked out of the courthouse, Sophie's hand in his, the day bright and breezy. She skipped beside him, oblivious to the battle averted, her joy a victory in itself. They stopped for ice cream, strawberry naturally. Extra messy, Sophie declared, her eyes sparkling. Just how you don't like it. Ethan laughed, the sound light unburdened. That's how I know it's yours. She giggled, smearing a dot of pink on his nose, and for a long, sweet moment, the world felt whole, a fleeting glimpse of the life they were rebuilding, one messy moment at a time. That night, a knock came at Ethan's door. He opened it slowly, finding Lila standing there in jeans and a simple coat, holding nothing but a folded piece of paper, her hair slightly windblown, her eyes tired yet more radiant than any power suit could make her. Neither spoke at first, the silence heavy with possibility. Then Lila's voice broke through, soft but resolute. I forgot how to knock until you reminded me that doors only stay closed when we're too afraid to ask for another chance. Ethan stepped aside, his gaze steady, inviting. Sophie looked up from the couch, blinked twice, then grinned, her joy unfiltered. You came back. Lila knelt beside her, her voice warm, sincere. Only if it's okay with you. Sophie nodded, her smile a beacon. You missed the rocket launch. I'll never miss another one, Lila whispered, her words a promise etched in truth. Sophie threw her arms around her, and Ethan watched, a quiet reverence settling over him as the broken places in their hearts began to stitch together, thread by thread, choice by choice. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep, her hand still clutching Lila's, Ethan led Lila to the kitchen. They sat in silence, not the kind born of avoidance, but of intimacy, a shared space where words weren't needed. Ethan poured tea, the steam curling between them. You didn't have to come back, he said, his voice low, steady. I know, Lila replied, her eyes meeting his. So why did you? She exhaled, long and real, her voice raw. Because running never healed me. The silence between us, it hurt more than anything I've ever walked away from. I don't want to be the woman who builds empires and loses every room worth living in. Ethan's gaze was unflinching, searching. And what do you want to be? She leaned forward, her voice steady, vulnerable. The woman who stays. The one who learns to color outside the lines with a 6-year-old and gets strawberry jam on her silk blouse. The one who laughs at midnight and cries in the morning and isn't afraid to say I was wrong. Ethan's smile was soft, tired, whole. I was wrong too. I thought love had to be earned with suffering, that I had to prove I wasn't broken. But maybe love is what happens when two people agree to carry each other's pieces, even the sharp ones. Lila reached for his hand, her touch a quiet vow. I'm not perfect. Good, Ethan said, his voice warm, certain, because perfect never taught anyone how to stay. The tea grew cold, but the moment only warmed, a fragile hope blooming in the quiet. Weeks later, love took root like soil turned in spring, tentative but vibrant. Ethan began writing again, not just fragments but chapters of something larger. A novel, perhaps, about second chances, not starting with perfection, but with mess, growing into grace. Lila stepped back from her board chair, not in retreat but in renewal, launching a foundation in her mother's name to support working-class parents rebuilding their lives. On Sunday mornings, Ethan, Sophie, and Lila made pancakes, burnt ones, drowning in syrup, with laughter that needed no explanation. One morning, Sophie stood in the hallway, clutching a crumpled drawing. I made this, she said shyly. Ethan and Lila unfolded it together, revealing three stick figures holding hands, a sun above, messy grass below, and across the top, in crooked pink crayon, our home. Ethan looked at Lila looked at Sophie, and no one spoke, because sometimes the heart speaks louder than words, weaving a family from broken pieces into something whole.